So I may start then. What I really would like to talk is to say something about how, in the light of my experiences through the years with civic and citizenship education internationally, I came to some ideas about whether those international studies can be and are of use for educational improvement. We made the small project on this recently, and I will be mostly speaking about this project, but what I would like to start with is to stress out something that all of us know well, but maybe once a while it's worthwhile to say it again. To say something about the particular characteristics of civic and citizenship education as a school subject. First of all, they have strong linkages to political and social context. Within a country, for example, to existing model of democracy, to economic situation, to relations between various groups, to specific events like pandemic at the moment. And as we could hear even from very well developed and established democracy, for example, the change of political orientation after the national election, like moving from more left-oriented parties to more right-oriented parties, have an influence on civic and citizenship education teaching in schools through number of canals, which we all know. There is also the importance for civic and citizenship education in schools of country relations with the world. For example, its position in international organizations. For example, as my home country, Poland, is now in quite bad relations with European Commission, it can make less openness of this country for programs and advice on civic and citizenship education that comes from this environment. There is also importance of specific bilateral relations. Maybe this is not of that meaning in the well-developed democracies, but for example, in my part of Europe, this is important, how countries define yourself and to what other countries they relate themselves, like whether they want to be rather post-communist countries or rather Nordic countries. That's true for some of former communists. Well, in this case, parts of Soviet Union. The second important issue for teaching and designing civic and citizenship education in schools is a model by which school functions. That is organization of schooling, for example, early tracking, position of vocational education. We had signals from some European countries that position of vocational situations in some of them is lower than position of general education. That makes an influence on how civic education is organized and what are effects of this education. The other aspects of schooling is school autonomy and its internal organization. For example, more authoritarian or more democratic character. In some countries, schools community is organized vertically. There is the top of the administration, and then teachers, and then students, the most advanced higher and the less advanced level. More democratic relations within schools result in different ways, for example, of teaching the civic and citizenship. The other thing is organization of civic and citizenship education in schooling. It's not the same in all countries, because only in some there's a specific subject with a focused curriculum. In some others, it's infused, is selected other subject areas like history, mother tongue, etc. Finally, civic and citizenship education differs from many other school subjects in what is its content. Because for its content, we have knowledge and understanding of various concepts and aspects of people's social and political life, but also attitudes and behavior of students are the object of influences of schools. This sometimes produces a lot of social and political discussion within the countries and has an impact on the profile of civic and citizenship education in the school. So as you see, it's quite specific subject. What therefore is the interest of international studies in this subject? Why they are taking place at all? First, the big portion of this interest is the same as in all other school subjects. Whatever circumstances that I mentioned earlier, the studies focus on students' achievements. They focus on content of curriculum in each specific country, on teacher preparation for teaching this subject this way or another, and on teaching practices. But there are some more specific areas, not that important for other school subjects, or even not important at all. Such areas are role of school versus other agents of socializations. In some countries, there is never-ending discussion whether preparing new citizen is a role of school at all, whether it should be just left for the family and close environment. But if school has to play a role, then we need to ask how it will interact in this process with other agents of socialization that will have their impact anyway. The other specific issue is how knowledge and understandings are related to attitudes and behaviors, whether they are relatively independent, like, well, somebody may have a kind of big knowledge in the area, but have both positive, either positive or negative attitudes, political attitudes, or be active or passive citizen anyway. We want to understand this better, and school gives us a chance to, through analyzing what's happening there, to understand it better. There are issues like stable and flexible context of teaching how to deal with current events. That's a big thing for teachers who do not get the special preparations for pandemic coming, right, to the schools, but they need to often to address this issue. Or for example, we have heard many stories in European schools from the group, informing us about the big group of immigrants coming to the school that produces specific issues, problems, and sometimes even tensions between students or students and teachers, etc. Important specific issue for civic and citizenship education is also characteristics of school and classroom environments. I will tell about this more because those aspects of schooling are very important in this area. Finally, important thing is the role of practicing what is learned about citizenship. Of course, teachers have mostly tendency to limit themselves to transmitting knowledge to students. That's their task, as they say when we ask. But at the same time, this is so specific subject that we are can believe that if students do not practice some of the knowledge they are getting in the schools, then this whole education might be not that of value as we would like this to be. So I coming back to the question, with all those complexity and specifics, can results of international studies be used for better understanding and improvement of civic and citizenship education? Because that's our major concern, because we don't run complicated and expensive studies only to have an answer for a question whether our students are better Democrats than yours. It's not enough for us to know. Of course, they can, but the success in this depends on both sides, so to speak, on those who monitor, interpret, and suggest the implication for the results, but also on the audience who will be getting this. Therefore, we need to work with our results in such a way that will help those two groups somehow to meet and to get the good understanding that what we study and what we are getting is of value. And therefore, we should think about our results in the light of social and political context for whatever comparisons we do, especially in the case of economic, political, or social changes in the country, or substantive educational reform, or other changes in the educational systems, or for groups living in the country. I have, when inviting countries to the IEA Civic and Citizenship Studies, I have heard sometimes people saying that, well, you know, it's so specific, it's so country specific that we don't believe we can really compare and get something from this. And I think our studies, and I will go back to this, show that they can, if they properly interpret what they are getting in the context of their own country. In addition, studies in this area, maybe in all other areas too, but in this specifically, may, for better understanding international results, may need complementary research on national, regional, or international level. During the study, we've learned not only how things are, but we also learn about things that we should learn more if it's only possible, not easy sometimes. But. So we try to understand better how all of this happens in the small project we have done for IEA. Judith and me were editors of this publication called Influence of the IEA Civic and Citizenship Educational Studies, Practice, Policy, and Research. In this project, 15 countries participated. They were 7 old European democracies, plus USA. They were 3 new, as we call it, European democracies. They are not that new anymore, but they still have this label, I mean, the post-communist countries. And they were 4 Latin American countries on various stages of reconstructing democracy. Unfortunately, we didn't persuade any Asian country to participate. There was some interest in Hong Kong and in Taiwan, but because of some other tasks, the researchers who were involved in Icpsr in those countries couldn't deliver their chapters on time. That's pity. I hope the next time it will be better. Except on one country, namely USA, all other countries participated in 2 or 3 IEA civic and citizenship education projects. So they have quite a good experience with what could be done with results of those studies. We prepared for countries the guidelines to write the chapter. We ask about country context. We ask about various areas of influence, like public opinion, like educational policy, like practice or research. And we also suggested different methods of information collection, from documents, from analyzing the documents, from interviews with experts or people involved in the projects on different studies. And we also relied on personal experiences of authors because they were this way or another involved in those studies in their country, mostly as a national research coordinators. So what countries told us? First, why they were using the results of those studies. And they were different goals for doing this. First of all, they wanted to attract interest in the field of various groups in the society. There were many reasons for that, starting from being better informed in this discussion, whether school is a proper place to teach civic and citizenship education or not, but also to attract groups that usually were not interested in this field. For example, the employers. Employers usually were interested in the results of the studies that are important for the level of qualifications of their employees, like language, like reading, writing, counting, mathematics, science, etc. But in some countries, it was the idea that it would be important for the subject and for the development of the country even, if such groups put some attention to preparing new citizens in the schools. There were also practical reasons, as with any other school subjects, like advice for solving current problems in education. In the case of civic and citizenship education, they were very often issues related to problems for the periods we are talking about, issues related to problems with immigrants, new kids from new cultures in the schools, and people from the new cultures in the country. In some countries, that was nothing very specific, but in some others it was a rather new thing that was happening. And finally, the reason for this was for thinking about what results are giving them was a reconstruction of the civic and citizenship education. Countries where students were getting very low results comparing to other to students from other countries in civic knowledge, or they show something worrying in their attitudes or behavioral tendencies, wanted, of course, to improve their civic and citizenship education, and were looking carefully on the results. That was especially case of Latin American countries, I must say. How results were used? Major ways, of course, was preparing national reports and other materials to be used by different audiences, like mass media, like policymakers, like practitioners, like NGOs. The other way were different type of meetings and discussions, conferences, advisory meetings, workshops, training courses for teachers especially. And the first important area, Judith will tell about this more, of using the results, was using them as an inspiration for more research, either for secondary analysis of the data collected on the international level, or through approaching new specific issues for country or for region, sometimes for neighbor countries. How countries were trying to attract the interest in civic and citizenship education of various groups in the society. Of course, through informing broad public opinion about the student achievements in comparison to other countries. It's nothing impresses the public more than information that our students are really good Democrats, and God forbid they are bad Democrats, and who is responsible for that. But they were also stimulating public discussions on local, national, and regional level of goals of civic and citizenship education. This is still a bit around this issue, whether school is the proper place, and if school is the proper place, how this organization should be, how this education should be organized and conducted. They were also trying to indicate issues of concern in the society. For example, in few European countries, Western European countries, in some type of schools, they could identify more negative attitudes toward immigrants than in others. This is the important social issue, and especially if more than one country share this kind of experiences, that is encouraging to work on this and to do something on that and support each other in looking for solutions. The other thing was drawing attention to different results of education of future citizens in different types of schools. For example, general versus vocational schools. In some countries, this is a very sensitive issue because kids are relatively early sent to specific type of school. And there is this feeling that some of them are sent to worse schools, and from the starters they have not that good education as others. That is kind of social injustice, of course. Then a bit related to this is showing differences in the results of civic and citizenship education between different social groups, dependently, for example, of socioeconomic differences, of role of immigration background. We are saying often it's one of indicators in our studies, not only of civic and citizenship education, but also here, it's a number of books in home. We know that number of books in home is strongly linked to social economic position of the family, and this has a meaning for civic and citizenship results. There were also attempts in countries to encourage cooperation of different stakeholders in preparing future teachers. I remember, Judith, you probably would remember better the conference we were together in Arizona a couple of years ago. That was the first conference of civic and citizenship education, where was a big workshop organized by organization of employers who really wanted to know about the civic and citizenship education in schooling. I think that was one of the achievements of this area of education, to attract the attention of this group for preparing future citizens. And of course, all of this together serves also lifting status of civic and citizenship education in the society. For some, it's still not that important when comparing to teaching mathematics or science or reading.
Barbara, if you don't mind me interrupting you,
yeah,
you have about 5 minutes more or less for the talk, so we can take some questions, if that's okay.
Of course.
Thank you.
So I will be short. I thought I will have more time, but okay, well, you will have my PowerPoint presentation, so I will not go to the details, But of course, one of the major uses of the results of the IEA Civic and Citizenship education was in the curriculum changes and modifications, and in the teaching practices and different aspects of schooling that are related. Also, those studies results help us empowering the teachers of the subject. You will read it in my presentation, but it's also easy to guess how it can go. But to make it more interesting, even also students, because showing how good students are sometimes in this subject help some countries, for example, to lower the age of voting rights in local election for kids. Therefore, we can observe the interesting thing that I called here globalization of civic and citizenship education, because our studies proved not only relevance of research in this area for many countries and cultures. Of course, within democratic culture, that's true, but still, across the years, we had almost 50 countries in our studies. It helped to develop broadly shared concepts, and we have good cooperation with international organizations who help us to promote those concepts, such as citizenship competence or active citizenships and some others. Our studies also help to identify important aspects of education for this area. For example, classroom climate. And help us also to recognize better specific regional issues. In that sense, civic education, being still very national culture-related subject, is getting also international. And that somehow reflects the state of affairs in the present world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. So now, if I may, I would like to introduce Professor Judith TorneyPurta of the University of Maryland. Those of you, again, that work with civic education and with Icpsr know that Judith is a very important figure in this field, and she was one of the pioneers of civic education studies in the field. She will share with us a few comments on Barbara's presentation and also of the developments in the field in the United States. Judith, please. You are muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Would you like to share your presentation with us?
I sent slides.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have them?
Yes. Okay. Yes, give us 1 minute and we will arrange that.
I will start talking because
yes, please. Thank you.
Barbara's made a detailed and excellent presentation from her perspective as a social psychologist who's been deeply involved in seeking both political and educational change. I admire her studies and her background and her speech a great deal, and I'm so pleased that we have been working together for now a couple of decades. My comments in many ways are expansions of her ideas, and our common aim is that we want individuals who have the resources to take action to consider civic education more seriously in planning, especially for teacher development and to the extent possible for policy. And I'm going to reflect in particular about some activities in the United States that you may not know about. Am I supposed to do something here?
No, now we are sharing your slides, I think.
Okay,
we're almost
good.
there.
Good. Luck has played an important, good luck has played an important role in this field. I was asked to explore a new set of civic education studies in the beginning of the 1990s, and independently, some colleagues from Ohio State University invited me to a meeting near Warsaw. Someone literally pointed Barbara out to me across a crowded breakfast room and said, "You need to meet this woman." I knew only that she'd been a leader in Solidarity. I didn't know she was a social psychologist, actually. But over the succeeding decades, Barbara and I developed a strong friendship as well as a collaboration. And this resulted particularly in the co-edited book that she mentioned, which is Influences of the IEA Civic and Citizenship Education Study. But without the luck of this early 1990s meeting, in fact, I doubt that many of us would be sitting in this room today. I'm not sure we would have had a civic education study from the beginning. Barbara's given us an excellent perspective on the ways that educational institutes in Europe could advance civic education, especially through policy innovations and taking a national and an international perspective. This reflects our unique combination of experience as an activist and a researcher. It is often difficult for people like me, whose expertise has been confined to the academic world and in one country primarily, to recognize some of these paths of influence. But I have a few observations. The deeper we can get into understanding the data collected about civic education by IEA and what it means to the audiences of educators or policymakers, the more likely we are to succeed. We have to consider our audiences, as Barbara has also suggested. This means building networks of researchers, policy people, and educators, and to consider the study's accomplishments as they have been part of the impetus for national action in different country settings, some of which can suggest models for other countries to follow. Taking the long view, I believe that IEA civic education studies over the last 20 years have suggested ways of conceptualizing effective civic education. We need a research-based concept of this for students at different levels and in different national or regional settings, and a conceptualization that we can explain to groups outside of IEA and outside of the civic education professionals, because too often we're inaccurately criticized, I think, for being nothing but bearers of political messages. We need to understand these constraints as well as looking for opportunities and mobilize action, especially by those who prepare teachers. We need to look at innovations to understand what works and where the challenges exist, which may be in the students in their general lack of interest. I remember my civics class in California in the 8th grade is memorizing the counties of California in alphabetical order, which does me no good now, obviously, since I don't live in California. Might not have been if I had. In fact, as a side note, I went to the same junior high school as Kamala Harris in about 50 years before her, and I often wondered what kind of civic education she received when she was there. Barbara has presented the Influences book with an emphasis on part 1, and I'm going to do something similar for part 2.
We are now sharing your slide about part 2.
Yes, I see.
Yes, okay, perfect, thank you.
And I want to say that our purpose here in the whole book was to urge more attention to the subject in an already overcrowded curriculum. And keep in mind that if teachers' preparation in most countries has included little about this subject, it is not something that we can simply say, oh, it's your job to do this. In the civic studies, actually, teachers were asked about their views of what is important to teach in the subject area and about organizations outside school in which they had participated. The inclusion of these questions to teachers, and these were teachers in general, not not specifically specialized teachers. This made it possible for Frank Reichert, while he was a postdoc supported at the National Academy of Education in the US, to conduct analysis using the technique of profile analysis. He found that there are regional differences in teachers' views of the aims of civic education. The Nordic countries stand out for encouraging students' participation in and outside the school. That's from the teacher's point of view. In contrast, teachers in the Asian countries believed that the positive results of civic education would be found in reducing conflict within the school. It was not primarily reaching outside. In a second analysis that recently won an award, actually, from the European Educational Research Association, Frank used this profile analysis to show that teachers who participated in a variety of organizations outside the school, and these ranged from community organizations to trade unions, said they were able to use classroom activities which had these anchors in outside school organizations. In other words, they could give real life examples to their students. This profile analysis has been innovative in that most other researchers have dealt with basic country differences in mean scores, or sometimes looked at other associations within countries, but have not looked at the profiles or patterns of the wide range of attitudes and behaviors of teachers, and for that matter, of students. There's a value, I think, to the wide range of chapters in part 2 of the volume, because some authors have successfully suggested approaches. Others present regional perspectives or discuss how to tailor programs to particular circumstances. 2 chapters about Europe and Latin America have charted a path for early career scholars to embark on analysis, data archiving, and new programs. Other chapters in part 2 suggest a merging of concepts like moral education into civic education, as well as bringing in social theory, political science, and educational psychology, and an excellent chapter about teachers, about whom we have a great deal of data, which I often think we have not sufficiently had a chance to examine. My next point relates to something I noticed while reviewing country chapters in part 1. In past decades, a number of countries offered specific education classes for civics that were designed and sometimes even required in the curriculum. More recently, however, it appears that civic education in a majority of European and Latin American countries is designed to take place with a cross-curricular approach. It may not be called that, but what it means basically is that all teachers are expected to infuse civic topics into other subjects which they teach. Teachers often receive only a few very general guidelines about this area to help them here. And I think it's unrealistic in many cases for teachers of these other subjects to be expected to carry such major responsibility for civic education that is particularly appropriate, has to be, for the political and social systems in which their students live. These non-specialist teachers need assistance if they are to do this adequately. Now for some comments about civic education research in my own country. The US Department of Education, which is the official member of IEA, has unfortunately not agreed to participate in the IEA Civic Studies since 1999. It's been very frustrating that I have been unable even to get an appointment to speak with someone who authorizes this participation. The data collected in 1999 in CivEd, however, continues to receive considerable attention from researchers doing secondary analysis. And this has been my recent focus, and also, of course, the data which is now available from the subsequent ICCS studies. In fact, a few years ago, a scan of the literature from 1999 to 2009 found nearly 100 published analyses of IEA civic education data. Early career scholars at colleges and universities, in the US, yes, but also in other countries, are continuing to publish the results of this secondary analysis. Several analyses by Frank Reichert, a very talented researcher currently in a temporary position in Hong Kong, have utilized the statistical techniques of profile analysis, looking at how attitudes and objectives for civic education in the minds of teachers cohere or hang together he has at least 2 publications on teachers, and I suggest that you look at those if you have an interest. Looking more broadly, it's good news that in the United States, the Spencer Foundation has funded proposals from talented members of the early career generation and has made widespread secondary analysis more likely. First, there is the Icpsr at the University of Michigan. With this foundation funding, it has established a freely available archive of data sets called Civic Leads, actually civicleads.org, and an associated list of references, which they keep up to date, to articles that have been published using these data. CivEd 99 and ICCS 2009 and 2016 data are deposited there, thanks to a collaboration between Ralph Karstens from IEA Hamburg and David Bleckley at Michigan. Access to these data sets has prompted the publication of several articles, and just 2 weeks ago, a poster by David, myself, and Andres Sandoval Hernandez at an electronic convention. There we detailed ways in which both English-speaking and Spanish-speaking researchers could benefit from access to the IEA Civic data and other Latin American data. And this is especially important at the moment because in the aftermath of COVID, it has become very difficult to get permission from schools to release student time to fill out surveys or other research modes. They have too much to make up. The leadership of the Civic Leads archive is always open to further suggestions about collaborative relationships, which could certainly include Italian researchers and possibly Italian data sets and presentations. I encourage you to browse the archive and would welcome and be happy to support any suggestions you had for expansion. Second, in the United States, the National Academy of Education, also with Spencer Foundation support, independently has published a Civic Reasoning and Discourse project volume under the oversight of Greg White, the Academy's executive director. I have to, knowing what a big family IEA is, I have to say that I know he understands the IEA Civic Education Studies, as he used CivEd data in his doctoral dissertation. A full chapter in that National Academy report is based on what I consider to be the most important research finding of our IEA Civic Education Studies. That finding has stood out going back 50 years to the 1970s, which is that students who report that their classrooms are characterized by an open climate for classroom discussion are likely to have higher civic knowledge and more positive attitudes, including attitudes toward immigrants. This chapter in the Academy report is entitled Learning Environments and School and Classroom Climates as Support for Civic Reasoning, Discourse, and Engagement. The senior chapter author is Carolyn Barber, now a professor at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, whose name may be familiar to some of you from her participation in 2 of IEA's early IRC meetings. In the Academy report, Carolyn and Chris Clark conducted a comprehensive review of literature on the role of an open classroom climate in promoting positive civic education outcomes, going beyond and extending, in other words, this finding, which has been so important to IEA studies. And again, this has been over 5 decades that we've known that this is an important aspect of good civic education. And it represents, I believe, a direction for further consideration and thinking of ways of helping teachers to establish these climates in the future. You can access the report of the National Academy, including this chapter on open classroom climate, at naeducation.edu, I'm sorry, naeducation.org, looking under Civic Reasoning and Discourse for Chapter 6. I'm also glad to send that to you separately if you didn't have a chance to write it down. Other chapters in that report may also be of interest. For example, Diana Hess, who was an early career scholar when she attended the release of the CivEd report in 2001, is now the Dean of a School of Education. And her research team has a very thoughtful chapter in the Academy report that builds on her decades of work in pedagogical practices. Many countries, including Italy, could benefit from establishing a group of experts to examine the IEA civic education studies and issue either a short report or something longer with more detail and more opportunities, because individuals who have a chance to reflect on findings and write about them very often then can incorporate the things that are learned more effectively in their own work and in that of their students.
Judith, may I please ask you to come towards the end of the presentation so we have some space for questions? Thank you.
I have one more paragraph.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And just so you know, and everybody, we had some technical issues in sharing like all the slides that you shared with us, but they will be available on the conference website. So please, and I see you're perfectly capable of talking about them without being.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Thank you.
So I believe that there are a lot of options in these areas for attention to curriculum or focus in teacher preparation in Italy, or I would urge you, as I think you already have, to explore action together with the Council of Europe. In closing, I believe that enhancing the classroom climate for discussion and the school climate for participation deserves further exploration in Italy as well as elsewhere. The way a teacher approaches civic education issues in the classroom, of course, is based on their own political and community experience, as well as on the curriculum that they are intended to implement. Further exploration of the teacher data, such as Frank Reichert has undertaken, has particular value. In conclusion, I'd like to thank you for giving Barbara and me the opportunity to reflect on these studies. We are very lucky to have experienced the IEA's positive collaborative spirit, and in particular, the professional expertise that you and others have given to it over the decades. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Barbara and Judith. Given the time constraints, we decided to go to our next presenter and leave space for questions at the end, just to give you all the opportunity to have some questions and to listen to both sets of speakers of today. So I will be introducing it's a great honor to introduce Dr. Silvia Montoya, which is the director of UNESCO Institute for Statistics. Silvia is doing a tremendous work in the context of the Education 2030 agenda, and especially regarding the Sustainable Development Goals. And she's working with countries to really incorporate data from large-scale assessments in measuring and monitoring the Sustainable Development Goals in different countries. So Silvia, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you. I know it has been a long day, and I hope I am changing a little bit of the angle. And thank you so much to INVALSI Roberto for having me here and giving the opportunity, because it's a good opportunity to reflect about the contribution of research and how you have been brought us and the rest of the world to this point, reflecting over the needs, and sometimes that the indicators we were using in some moment were not enough to show and to describe an educational system, that there are not enough to look at the issues of how to attend the difference in outcomes of the children, the participation in society, the access to education, but also the quality of a different aspect that has been actually raised in this 2015 agenda. And for this reason, I would like to try to connect these two words. So bear with me, and we just try to go a little bit into that. And actually, we have some very good news in terms of some of this research that we have been hearing, ICCS, all the work of IEA, the work of OECD, of PISA, all the national institutions that are actually have been taken for decades, the measurement of learning has actually brought to very important points in terms of the definition of the agenda. So this is what I would like to reflect a little bit why we use indicators and what we're trying to wait on progress and trying to see and identifying challenges and opportunities. These agendas are never exhaustive. There are just indicators, and for this reason, it's very important that you use the data and then you can bring with results, and then we make us reflect. And for this reason, in this agenda, we also have periods of revision of the framework, because every 5 years we could reflect, are this enough? Should we include climate change? Should we include the attitude towards climate change and some of the other aspects? Now we know that with COVID, eventually is going to also be appearing some of these aspects. And also try to go to how we contribute from each of our positions to this moving forward in our common agenda, beyond the fact that countries can go to different extent to support the SDG agenda. We know that Europe has a particular standing. I will touch base on this for a moment. We are all making commitments, and I think that theoretically and conceptually, we all agree that every child and youth should learn, should participate in life, and we should, each of us, each country, make contribution towards moving forward to this. So basically, the data in this SDG 4 agenda is really seen as a critical piece, this piece that has not been used that much in the Millennium Development Goal, but it also has been part of a cycle what it is serving, and us as a statistical community, we have to look and to select the appropriate set of indicators, looking at what has been done, looking at what research is telling us that is important, to define the international standards that are making the data comparable, so to try to have quality and comparability. Some of the points that we have been hearing from Barbara and Judith are really very important in terms of bringing our understanding. It's very difficult to compare oranges with bananas and with apples. We don't get anything from there. There is a huge effort that has been done for a long time about trying to make as comparable as possible some of the context of the concepts, but also to ensure independence. For this reason, it's important that we have independent statistics, independent research on learning, independent research in academia that is actually helping us to move forward. In the way it has been actually settled is that we actually are having a role as a statistician, as researchers in this agenda, but this is serving a policy making, is a definition at the policy level in each of the country, because the reality is that we don't define the educational system policies. It's someone else, and we have to support from each of our positions that definitions. They're defining policy objectives, they're defining implementation, then there is a measurement, and this is where we come on board with what are the areas that we should define and measure. And then we have some definition about progress. Eventually, we just think that is a mean score in some test, and then we reflect that it's not enough, that we have to look at equity, that we have to look at the participation in society, we have to look at the attitude and the knowledge about environmental issues. With that, we monitor progress, we see what are the problems, and then we reformulate the policies. It has been seen as a cycle, and it has been very clear in the UN Secretary report of the end of 2014, when the agenda of the Sustainable Development Goals was to be set, that the data has a critical role, but has a critical role for helping to policy dialogue, and there invites all stakeholders. There is nobody that is outside. It's not only the policymaker, it's you as researchers, it's us as part of multilateral agencies, it's the donor that is trying to help. This is a common agenda. So we have actually defined that the national level is the most important, but there are a level that is also the regional level. These are discussions in each of the regions that were close and have some more issues in common that related to other regions that are serving to identify areas in common, indicators that are in common, that serve us to talk to each other and to understand what is going on. There are a thematic framework that is more related to each of the areas, like for instance, education. It doesn't matter cross-cutting all over the globe. And then there are a very reduced number of indicators that are the ones that are actually serving us globally when we have to want to have a helicopter view of the progress in education. There are these very few in this target 4, that is education, that are serving to look at that. In the case of education, there are 12 indicators, the global one. Then there are in the thematic framework some other indicators for the country whom I want to measure. That has been the result of an international consensus. But then there are regional discussions. And then I will come back to Europe for a moment. And this is actually all these indicators and the measurement are related, and the data we collect, to frameworks that are policy frameworks. This is not us saying, oh, I love this indicator and I would like to have the indicator in the framework. It's about the policymakers that have been at the upper supra level, presidents that have said, these are the 17 targets. And these are the indicators for those 17 targets that are around 200 that we're taking for monitor all the agenda. But then we have a thematic framework that in this case is coordinated by UNESCO, but all the stakeholders, civil society, multilaterals, academia are part of that. And we have a thematic framework that is also serving with indicators that are including those ones. And then in each of the regions, we have that the regions, the countries in each of the regions have gotten together to agree on a set of indicators that, given in that region, the policy priorities are common, are considered to be important. And this is a very important point. And obviously, there is a national framework. There is a national set of policy priorities. And the idea is that the national level is articulated and coherent, and then we don't have one indicator in one level that is incoherent with the indicator at other level. We just try to take advantage of all this coordination. And this is also, to some extent, a kind request, more than request from the Secretary General. Try to work together, try to harmonize definitions, don't duplicate on the work, don't collect the data twice, try to agree on concepts, try to search compromises. And this is very important, the work that has been done in the research community towards giving us some of the concepts that are allowing us to move forward. And this is a little bit of the summary of this monitoring framework we're using for the SDGs, where we have these 12 global indicators, we have these 43, and then we have these regional indicators. What are the characteristics of these indicators in this new agenda? Focus on outcomes, not only on access, the focus on looking at the quantity, focus on the result of the learning process, look at the attitude towards the other, towards the environment, towards the living society, towards being integrated in a group. It's a broader agenda for this reason that demands more data. Aims at having the comparable indicators, not because there is a community that is defining the comparabilities, because it's not possible to talk if we're talking about different things. And you know better than us, it's important the context, but it's important to understand that in that context, we're talking about the same construct. So this is one of the key dimensions that is important, and we know that many of the work that has been done in the last decades, especially by IEA, but also by OECD in different areas for some of the regional assessment, has been brought to some of the understanding about these commonalities that are happening and making comparable. These indicators are used for that, for the national agendas, for guiding policy discussion, but to monitor progress. So my job to some extent is related to the job of you discussing of the different factors that are helping us to improve the job, but at the same time, we're informing the policymaker about what areas and what issues we encounter in our work. And this agenda has also come to use different data sources. It has actually, and this is where research has a huge area of contribution also on top of what has been contributed so far, to see how we combine these different data sources. What happened when we have some information that is coming from learning assessments, another one that is coming from management systems, enrollment, another one that is coming from human resources, teacher registries, with other one that is coming from household service, that are very important population data that is talking about the family, the context. So this agenda is calling us to use all the sources and to make how we combine them towards having a unique story, a unique explanation for the policy making. And in those ones, we just need to have these critical definitions about when data is comparable, when concepts are comparable, and when the quality of the data is good enough to make analysis of the data. Because at the same time, we know that with the data, we know about representativeness, we know about some other issues about standard errors that are coming from some of the way of operational process. So this is very important, these important aspects. And this is to some extent how this agenda has actually, as you could see, we have different sources of data, and these different sources of data and all contributing to a common monitoring of the progress of all of our agenda. And this is how, this is some of the areas that as I mentioned, need to have a further development. And this integration of data is very important for us. So it's very important that we can actually say that if some of the conclusions we're having from some research that is related to how the family context influence the attitude towards citizenship of integration in society of the students, then we can combine this data with the composition of the households that are coming from household service, so we can make an inference for the whole collective of some given country or society. So these are the different areas that need really to have a huge development. We have that learning assessment and measurement of learning in different areas is important. We have that information on human resources is important. We still have many gaps on understanding what happened with the teachers, what happened with teacher attrition, what happened with the qualification of teachers in different areas. We're still having some of the issues about understanding the resourcing at the school level, what is happening with the physical context, and then learning assessment, actually large scale learning assessment, since this year are informing also the global agenda, because learning assessment in the context questionnaire collect data about the environment and the school, the connectivity to electricity, to internet, to toilets, the quality of the toilet. So in many of the learning assessment, we have data of this type. And then there are data about family context that is helping us to inform, but still is not enough, because in many cases, this data is having issues in terms of the collection. And to some extent, I just want to stop, because learning and the quality of learning, as they used to call, we know that is more than that, is a big area that has come in this agenda. We have 5 of the targets that are critically related to measurement learning in different stages and in different aspects. In target 4.1, we talk about learning in reading and mathematics in basic education in 3 different points. In 4.2, we talk about the preparedness of the students to enter primary school by looking at the development of the child in 3 different aspects. One of them is the cognitive one, but there are also related to socio-emotional dimension and health. We also look at digital skills, and this is a very important indicator, and we know that has come on top of the discussion. In Europe is one of the indicators that go into the priorities of the European area, and is an indicator that is also measured from one of the largest scale assessment, and is going to be incorporated in the measurement as an invitation to widespread in all the European area. We know about literacy and numeracy proficiency of youth and adults is another indicator that is very important, not only about the children, it's about the participation also of youth and adults. We have an indicator that in this moment is basically measured through PISA from OECD. It's a survey on skills again. And then we look at the skill for global citizenship and sustainability. The indicator 471 is an indicator that look at the system, that look at if the country has incorporated in their policies, in the training of the teachers, in the national assessment regarding these areas. But there are 2 thematic indicators that look at global citizenship and education for sustainability. And they look not only at the cognitive dimension, they look at the non-cognitive dimension and the behavioral dimension. It's not only about how much I know that makes damage to the climate and the situation of the world towards climate, but it's also how I act towards that issue. And this is actually the reporting of these 2 indicators that is since the last year is thanks to the work and the use of ICCS basically, and teams and peers, and also to OECD, to PISA that has some of the questions there. So we have found that you have been working for a while on this, on developing the constructs, on improving the constructs, on explaining that, on framing a global conceptual framework, on framing an operational way of measuring. And we have just simply gone and taken advantage of that work and actually having this and used for the reporting. And this is a very important point before I just continue about the reflection about why your work is so important to us. It's very important you continue trying to understand what's going on, that what are the areas that are happening, what are the different aspects, because we could see that we have reacted, we have taken the message, the society has said these issues are important for the agenda, and then we have not come empty-handed. We have this work done, and because we have this work done, we have actually gone over the process of making this actually possible and suitable for reporting. And this is an indicator that is reporting since March this year with the disaggregation, but the different possibilities that ICCS and TIMSS and OECD PISA allow us to do. And this is a very important contribution about why it's important all this more little and more large scale research toward making and improving our understanding of what are the issues that are important for the education systems. And this is actually one stop in the European area and the target for the European area. Europe is really teaching us a lot at the rest of the work, and we're just trying to learn as much as we could and try to do as fast as we could to try to see how we can spill over and implement. Europe has for the last decade, a little bit more, some targets already for 2010-2020, and they have revised, they have seen again, they have revised and said, okay, let's see how we define those targets. Are the same strategic objective for the European area? Are they the same or not? And if they are the same, are the indicators the same indicators that we were using in the previous decade, or should we add new indicators? This is a result of what has been published in February this year as part of the European Commission, as part of the agreement that all the countries has made about the strategic priorities for Europe, that are 5, that are aligned with the SDG targets, because we are all part of our common agenda. What they have is that what you have are indicators that are not exactly the same. You have some extra indicators because the area have more high-income countries, because the issues for the region are different, and because you have also some participation in some measurement of learning or some other aspect of learning that in some other part of the work are not happening. So one of the indicators has entered as very important in this agenda is the indicator about measuring digital skills. And this indicator is going to be measured by 2024. Is hoping to actually be expanding to all the region, the ICILS, the measurement of the digital literacy from IEA. And we know that is very important, and the region has considered that is very important, and this is one of the indicators that are entering critical as the measurement. This is another discussion that we have. This indicator is a thematic indicator globally, but we have very few countries participating in some kind of this assessment. We know that in Europe this is possible, and we're looking forward to see what is coming from as part of this experience, as part of the research that is going to be associated to this experience, because this is actually coming on board. And I just want to go to the first indicator and explain to you how we have worked and how we have taken advantage of all the research that has been done regarding some of the indicators that are in this agenda. We have, in general, the Agenda 2030 tries to look at outcome and try to monitor progress. To monitor progress, well, we have the not such a nice call to define a target. And some part of these issues has also been solved by many of the discussion in Europe. But in general, the agenda is describing in some of the indicators some concepts or constructs that has been actually defined thanks to the work that has been done. For instance, indicator 411 talks about the proportion of children and young people who are reaching at the end of primary in 2nd and 3rd grade, that is early primary, and at the end of lower secondary, a minimum proficiency level by sex. And the indicator seems to be very simple, but then when we look at the indicator in detail, it's asking us for a definition of the minimum proficiency level. And it's asking us for a proportion, and then to monitor progress, actually to some extent, we just need to have some sense of what could be a reasonable proportion of students about this. So one of the tasks that we have done at the beginning, that we have done for all the indicators, is that we have looked at who is working at the cross-national level. So it has been already have been a progress towards a definition at the cross-national level, comparable between countries, that is making us possible to define this minimum proficiency level. And the reality is that there is not only one example. There are many examples, not that many that allow us to use more than the 2 hands to count them, but there are enough to be not unique. And this actually has not been a consensus, because when we look to the proficiency level of each of the assessments, that has a definition, because it's not only the score, I got 400 as an average in teams. This is not the relevant discussion. The relevant discussion is that for the 400 are associated to what contents and skills the child should know. And this is what this agenda has tried to center, to try to see on the entitlement of the level of knowledge that the child should have. So with this, we have embarked on the definition based on the work done by IEA, by OECD, by PASEC of the Confirmation in Africa, by SACMEC in Anglophone Africa, by Laboratory of UNESCO in Latin America, in trying to see what are those assessments measurements, what are they measuring now, how they are defining the proficiency level descriptors, not the scores, because at the end, the metrics is something that you can scale, but it's what are they defining as proficiency level and what they are taking in each of those assessments at the reasonable level that is taken as a reference inside the assessment. And trying to focus on that definition of the minimum proficiency level to some extent that is embedded in each of these cross-national comparable data to try to see if we can build something that is globally relevant. And then again, it comes all the work that has been done during 2 or 3 decades in trying to measure those contracts and trying to see that the items are relevant to the measurement, and all that research that has contributed to refine all those levels, that we have been able to do something like this. Let's keep this one. We have mapped all the proficiency level descriptors that were in all the cross-national assessment that were 96, almost 100, just to keep the number as a, and with this definition, we have gone one by one to what contents and skills each ones are defining. Then we have sat down with all these cross-national programs. We have sat down with IEA in the room, with SACMEC, all of them together, and a group of experts and researchers from different communities, and that has sat with us in a room and tried to agree on what is the minimum proficiency level based on those definitions. We have not invented anything. We have taken what has been done. We have facilitated that work, and we have come to a definition in contents and skill that is a verbal definition, that is a relevant definition from the pedagogical point of view, is a relevant definition for the teacher who is in front of the students trying to teach to them, and is relevant into the definition of the items that has to be incorporated to that. Thanks to that definition, this indicator has been reporting for the last 2 years with an agreement of what level of PISA is equivalent to what level of teams, what level of Laboratory of UNESCO is equivalent to the other level, but this is based basically on all the work that has been done before that we have come. And thanks to that definition, based on those, how you call Compedia, or I think that it has another name in the IEA language, and the mappings that we have in the Laboratory of UNESCO and all, we have come with a global content framework that is actually merging all those mappings that has been done. We have come with the global proficiency framework that is having those definitions that are the ones we are using for reporting, and some other tools that we have been building now that we have been compiling items that are actually coherent with those definitions. Let's see if I can go to some of the, I just want to go given the time. In Europe, actually, I just want to look at the issue of progress. You are always ahead. Some steps, in some cases there are more, in some cases there are less, but you are ahead in general in terms of some of the, because those conversations and most of the research is documented, has been done in part of the global north, as we used to say. But in these 7 indicators, and I just want to call that to the attention, that everything is not only using indicators that are using those definitions that are common across the participants, but they are defining targets. So this issue that we're coming to define now as part of the agenda of the SDG has been a practice, has been already happening in Europe. Now we have, for instance, for this cycle of the European areas, those indicators are defining already a target. They are saying in general, because the way the indicators are defined, you can define as a maximum you want to achieve, or you want to agree that any country in the region has less than a certain percentage. For instance, taking the indicator 411 on learning, the European area takes a 411C, that is indicator in a lower secondary, that is measured by teams and PISA. I understand that in the region is PISA the one that is used, but the indicator does not refer to achieve 99%. The indicator says that no country should have less than 15% of low achievers, according to that level. So at the end of the day, you already have made that combination of having that definition of the minimum proficiency level, having the definition of a target that you actually are not saying. Each country can go above that. If a country wants to have 95% of achievers or 5% of low achievers, it's perfectly possible. But the region has agreed that no country in the region should have less than 15. And this is going to happen again for the indicator on digital skills, because it's going to be a definition of the same type about what is achievable by that. And this is the next step that we're trying to have at the global level, to try to have for each of the indicators some level that is a level that is taken as a minimum for the countries, and trying to focus on the countries that are the ones that are lagging behind, the most lagging behind. And from there, we just need to understand the equity dimension. We just need to understand the associated factors, the explanation of that. And from that, we just need to have research that is guiding policy to try to understand, to try to achieve those targets that are the ones that the policymakers are committing. My role is to compile, to facilitate, to compile the data. The large scale assessment, the programs are trying to actually to get all the working research to try to put these measurements into place. The countries are putting that into place, but it's only through research that we could be able to achieve those targets, because only by putting into place the right policies to achieve those targets is that we're going to be able to achieve them. It's not by me putting numbers in a table, and it's not by me for announcing more large scale program. It's by understanding the root causes of the problems, and this is only answered by research. So it's very important that you continue with that work, because for making our job easier, and for making the work of the policymakers easier, and at the end of the day, to make the life of the children and the youth that are really needing to have those policies into place easier also for them. So thank you so much for your work, and thank you so much for your attention. I know there has been a different approach and a different take, but I hope that it has been actually meaningful to you. Thank you so much for the opportunity again.
Thank you so much, Silvia. Now I would like to open the floor for questions, and please address your questions to any of the presenters. That means Dr. Barbara Malak, Professor TorneyPurta, Dr. Silvia Montoya. Thank you. And of course, our online audience is also invited to raise their hand if they have any questions.
Thank you very much to all the presenters for the very interesting presentations that I have given, and from the privilege point of view from which they have given us some overview of a variety of themes. My question would actually be for Dr. Barbara Malak and Professor TorneyPurta. In Italy, we are just having a new reform of civics and citizenship education, which is from K through 12, entailing like 33 hours per year minimum of teaching of civics and citizenship education across subjects over 3 main areas. One is civics and the Constitution. The second is sustainable development education. And the third is digital citizenship. From your privileged point of view of knowledge of large-scale assessments and in general and ICCS in particular, what do you think that we could learn in terms of how to assess and how to accompany, let's say, the research and policy development on this topic in Italy? Thank you very much.
Well, may I?
Absolutely, please go ahead, Barbara.
I might disappoint you a bit because I cannot answer the question. I think that the only people that can answer this are Italians who are doing reforms. And they have to look at the results of international studies and ask themselves, is there something in them that can help us move forward? I have one good message for you. There is a big group of Italians that is involved in IEA International Civic and Citizenship Education Studies in years. And those guys have an advantage over people like me or even Judith. Namely, they know international results, but they also know Italy. What we were always very surprised with was that there were in the past not that many reforms in civic and citizenship education in Italy, but the results of Italian students were good. There were always differences, especially regional differences, but still in general terms were good. So you have somewhere this good basic thing that can be developed and improved. That's all I can say, sorry.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Do we have any other questions from the audience?
I'd just like to reinforce what Barbara said.
Please.
I'm a very big believer in people using the data that is available to them, and I mean large-scale quantitative data and other data. I think running out to collect, to make new frameworks and collect new data ought to be deeply informed. By that, I mean really looking into the data we have already collected over these 20 years even, and the ways that they hang together. As a single new item is not going to provide the answer to what we need to know about assessment. It's a process of building on what you have, and a lot of talking to both teachers and students about these sorts of issues. It can't just come off the top of a bookshelf somewhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That said, I'd be glad to help try to do some of this, because this is what I've been trying to do for a very long time. And Barbara, I think, feels the same way.
Sure, yeah.
I think we have one more question, but okay, so Patrizia's alter ego, Daniela Vidoni.
Hello again, thank you. Well, this is just for issues of equity, equal treatment. A question now for Silvia Montoya. Thank you very much also for your presentation. We were very interested by, in a sense, the range of indicators that you're actually looking at that are being developed from, let's say, international large-scale assessments or administrative data. Now, given, the role of INVALSI and the type of data that INVALSI collects in addition to international large-scale assessment, and given that tomorrow we also have a session about comparability across countries of achievement data, do you think that there is scope to have to basically further increase the use of national databases for actually having more in-depth analysis of, in-depth production, let's say, of indicators relevant for the topics you're looking at? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. The question is really very good, and I have to say that we have been actually trying to expand the possibility to use national data especially from learning assessment, because in this moment we are using cross-national data because they have already developed the way to compare, and there was no agreement actually on this what to measure. I mean, it's like we think there has been 3-4 decades or more of work, but we have been like, now we have clear that PISA level 2 is corresponding to teams low, intermediate, international, and this kind of comparison. So we have been focused a little bit on trying to look at this from the national point of view, but these assessments in general have different characteristics, are aimed at different points. So it's like have developed a methodology that they have been piloting and trying to use the data. The issue with the national assessment in general and national databases have a lot of potential, not only about the administrative, but the data related to large scale to report another indicators. In this moment, large scale learning assessment mainly, because they have been developed recently, are helping to report on bullying, to report on the issue of equity on these aggregations. There are reporting on home language. There are reporting in support to children to learn. That is one of the indicators that is also. There are reporting about professional development of teachers. There are reporting also as well about teacher salaries in some of the cases of one of the learning assessment. So we have that the learning assessment has a lot of, there are a school environment that is also reporting. So there are a lot of information that is collected as part to explain the learning outcome of the child that is collected in the context questionnaire. So far we have used the cross-national assessment. We are really aiming to use the national assessment. In the cognitive part, we have already a methodology that is piloting into place, but requires a lot of issues about quality of the data. And many of the countries who have a good quality national assessment are already participating in an international assessment. So it looks like more natural, though we have seen the tendency of many countries to say, I have a national assessment, I want to use it. So, but there is a process and equivalence. About using the rest of the data, we just need to go that the constructs are comparable, because teams measures, I don't know, bullying in a reference period, for instance, that is different reference period that the one is measured in laboratory of UNESCO, and this in itself is just a problem, because we just want to be measuring the same construct in the same reference period, or at least to be comparable, and there were the experts, then there is you, is the academia, is the researchers, who say to what extent a construct is comparable or not when you have some of these nuances. Because I can see the question, but then it's like, it really has to be the last month. It's too different to when you have an answer to the last 2 months or the last 3 months, then it's only research who can answer that question. Because only the research could have said that if there is no difference between reporting bullying in the last month or reporting the last 3 months, because the recall issue, the recall period, and some of these issues. So we're really very much willing to use national data, national databases for sure, but it needs a process of harmonization of the question. And then at the end of the day, is to try to converge somehow to measure more or less the same. It doesn't have to be the same question, but it has to be a question that is built in the way that according to research is measuring really the same construct. And there again is you having a crucial role in this usability of the data at the international level. I hope I have answered.
Thank you, Sylvia. Any other questions? Okay. If there aren't, actually, I would like to close this session, but before I do so, I want to share some information, because today we've been talking a lot about the International Civic and Citizenship Education Study. And I actually saw a lot of people interested in the framework on civic competences. And I think both sets of presentations of today dealt with that, and how to use information, disinformation for policy and informing the civic reform in Italy. So one piece of information that I wanted to share, it's the book that Barbara mentioned, the Influences book. I had the pleasure to contribute to it, but I wanted to tell you that Italy also has an assignated chapter, which was led by Laura Palmerio of INVALSI, where there are some reflections on how these results are used in the context of Italy. So for those of you that would like to have a look, this book, it's freely available. It was commissioned by the IEA, so you can also even get in touch with any of us so we can share it. I can tell you that it enjoys a lot of interest in many, many countries, because it has such rich information in terms of policy. And then referring to the presentation of Sylvia, I also wanted to tell you that all this big efforts to monitor and develop indicators are freely available. You have free available data for Italy, for example, for indicator 474 and 475, which can give you an impression also about issues of citizenship and sustainability in the Italian context. So again, feel free to reach out to her or any of us, and we'll share that information. And with this, I thank you all for being here today. I know it's late, we're all tired, but it's perfect. And we need a coffee, and then I invite you back here if you want to see me again for yet again another ICCS session. Thank you all so much.